but what we're looking for is HRV as a measure of how our basically autonomic nervous system is doing. So our autonomic functioning. So the lower it's going to be means we're not getting those big, beautiful waves in the night, that time between breaths. And that's the time when we are basically optimized for recovery, or our best time to recover.
Hey, welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Tan, and I'm so glad you are here with me today. This show is all about human performance. Whether you want to be running your first 5K, run a PB for that marathon, or present your next project at your work meeting to the best of your ability, you are in the right place. We explore the body's incredible ability to heal, adapt, and evolve so you can crush limitations, reconnect your body and mind, and discover your extraordinary potential. And today on the show, I chat with neuroscientist, strength coach, and psychologist Julia Eyre. Her company White Line Performance is helping athletes and sporting clubs and institutions get the training program they need and the sports science and education necessary to build strong and robust humans and incredible athletes. On the show, we really dive deep into the mental side of performance, performing under pressure, dealing with the upsets and setbacks, and building self-awareness around your own physical, mental, and emotional health. We look at the different coping strategies you can incorporate into your routine to manage disappointment, negative self-talk, stress, performance anxiety, and really anything that impacts your performance and well-being. An incredibly valuable conversation whether you consider yourself an athlete or not. These tools will help you in life. So without further ado, enjoy this episode with Julia Eyre of White Line Performance. Julia, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast.
Jackie, thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm excited to be here. Let's share the mic. Let's get it started.
Let's do this. Well, firstly, I've been following you for a little while now, and I love your training philosophy and methods. And I recently watched your TEDx talk, which firstly, congratulations, TEDx is huge. So that's massive to start off with. But I loved your talk, building a complete athlete. And I think it's so important for athletes to hear, for coaches to hear, and also for parents to hear of kids who want to be, taking their sport seriously and moving through, that developmental stages. And I think, what you talk about is so important. And we're going to dive deeper into that today. But before we do, I'd love to get to know a bit more about you, how you got started in this industry and how it's evolved into what you're currently doing.
Oof. Good. Start with the easy questions first.
Who are you?
Right, exactly. That's the one I have to think about the most. Damn. Okay. Well, I'm Julia. I'm German American, very aggressively, actually, depending on what type of day you catch me on, and what time of day, even better. You caught me in the morning where it's still cool. I'm usually aggressively German around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it starts getting, really, really warm now that it's summer. And then like aggressively, I wish we had air conditioning. Everything is difficult. Open up all the windows. More seriously, though, I am a sports scientist and a psychologist. I'm working basically at the intersection of the brain and the body. So I sit right there on top of the nervous system and try to give coaches as well as athletes and other psychologists and medical professionals insights into what it's like working with the athlete as a human first, as opposed to an athlete or a player in their sport, like a sport specific player, and why it's important to actually focus on the development of that person and how that then stems into performance enhancement, like being able to have fun, being able to be healthy at all, and protecting the fun and protecting the time that you bring with your sport. That actually leads to a better performance at the end of the day. But it's difficult to have an unhappy athlete who is also not healthy then perform well over time. And so I really sit at that intersection of trying to educate people through psychoeducation and bringing in neuroscience, but also giving more specific skills as a, like, we need to be focusing on recovery. We need to be focusing on stress management. We need to be focusing on everybody going to therapy. We need to focus on coaches helping us sports psychologists, because there's not enough sports psychologists to fill the need. So that's, yeah, those are the intersections that I sit on. It's fun. I have my own company, and we White Lion Performance is then a consulting company, coaching company that works then with the athletes directly, implementing that and helping them learn that. And then through psychoeducation, teaching coaches and consulting with federations and clubs as well, how to do that. So it's kind of like an extension of my arms of this holistic caring for the entire athlete, putting the person before everything else, just simply because there's not enough sports scientists who think that way. There's not enough psychologists working with athletes to do that. So giving out the skills where I can.
Yeah. And you do it so well as well. Like, it's so important, like you said, that recovery aspect of an athlete's regime. Like you said, if you've got an athlete who is not doing well mentally, emotionally, that's going to come out in their performance. So it doesn't matter how much you train them physically, you won't be getting the best out of them anyway.
When we start on the basis of how's your recovery, how's your fitness baseline, how's your recovery baseline, as opposed to how's your performance, we start getting different answers and then can start building the performance from there, as opposed to having to pull back and focus on building recovery first. We start with the recovery is the must-have, that's the prerequisite, and now we can build the load and performance on top.
Yeah, cool. And you said recovery baseline. Like, how do you find what the baseline is for your athletes? Where do you start?
Great question. So for anybody watching, my recovery baseline is to have a French press right next to me at all times. So to fill up my coffee cup. For other people, that might look like sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night, or going out with their friends twice a week instead of, having practice 5 days a week, having time where they're not thinking about their sports. So when we talk about recovery baseline, we talk about basically the optimal position that we can go out from in being as fully recovered as possible athlete. So how's my well-being doing? How's my energy? How's my mood? What are my symptoms like? Do I have any depressed symptoms? How's my mental health? Do I have any anxiety? How are my stress levels overall? How's my communication with my coaches? Is there peace and harmony? Those are also serious factors that contribute to our well-being and to our recovery baseline, because if you're not living in harmony with your team, if you're not, if you're stressed out because you're hard on the ropes, hard on the rocks with your coach or something like that, it's really hard to get a good recovery score and even get to the point where we can add tons of load on top of you, or really even push you, because you just can't recover sufficiently. So when we talk about a recovery baseline, like I said, we're talking about well-being altogether and my perception of how I'm doing. So maybe I haven't slept those 9 hours, but I slept 7 and I'm feeling really good because I'm energized, having been around my friends over the weekend or spending time with family, or I just got through an exam and I had 1 or 2 days off. So now I'm feeling awesome because my brain was able to reset itself. So even though I haven't gotten my sleep all the way up, my recovery baseline is still high, because I was able to compensate with some other things. And so it's not as simple as having these 3 factors and they all need to be on 100%. It's more like 10, 12, 15 factors that are always context specific to the person. And then looking at the trends, how recovered are you? How's your well-being doing? And hopefully it's trending up. And with that, we can definitely work with that.
In saying all of that, do you work with, I mean, there's so much technology out there at the moment, the Whoop, Oura Ring, any sort of watch that you can wear that'll tell you your heart rate variability, your sleep, all of this stuff. Do you work with that as well and really take in that type of data, as well as obviously that perceived recovery from the athlete?
It is. It's really fascinating what technology is doing, because the technology is not all the same, right? So I wear Whoop. Aura is a little bit more aerobic based, and I'm not a super aerobic athlete, if I'm being totally honest with you. So I leave that to the runners and the professional soccer players, and I stick to the Whoop, where, you know, you can wear this when you're lifting. It just sits on your wrist. But we're not looking at the same data. It's not collecting all the same data. It doesn't use all the same metrics, and they're not all accurate. So having different levels of accuracy, these degrees of variability, it's difficult to say, you know, if we don't all have one device, hey, even though, you know, you have an Apple Watch, I have a Whoop, and the other 3 people have Aura rings, and the other 2 are just tracking based on perceived feeling. How do we get any degrees of accuracy from that, right? So I tend to go with perception and any external load data that we can get our hands on. So for my athletes, we're talking about external load being what they've done during the week. So their reps, their sets, the weight that they're doing. You know, if we're doing a 5x1 back squat and then they sprint 2 days later and then they play 2 days after that, I'm going to assume they're probably going to be pretty tired that week or over the course of those 5 days. And then having that external data plus the internal data, for example, HRV is one thing that I always love to work with if I can get that from somewhere, sleep data, and then perception of stress and mood, and any pain or soreness scores, because that can really tell us a lot about what's going on as well. And the combination of those things is how I can get like a recovery score or a wellness score, a fitness score from an athlete. But having said that, it's difficult when one sends me a screenshot from their Apple Watch that says I burnt 3,000 calories in this session, and then one from the Whoop where they burnt 250, and it's all over the place. So the technology is not uniform enough for us. So we kind of have to work off a combination of that. I love it. I'm glad that we have it. We're further than we were 10 years ago, but it's still a little bit confusing because it's just not uniform. We can't work with all of them at one time.
Yeah. And you mentioned HRV, heart rate variability. How do you use that in your training with your athletes?
So a lot of my athletes have Whoop, as I do, and it just gives you a HRV score for your night. So you're not getting it during training, anything like that. It's obviously great if you have a heart rate belt, a polar strap, or a Garmin, something like that, where you can get an HRV score all the time. But what we're looking for is HRV as a measure of how our basically autonomic nervous system is doing. So our autonomic functioning. So the lower it's going to be means we're not getting those big, beautiful waves in the night, that time between breaths. And that's the time when we are basically optimized for recovery, or our best time to recover. So that's just giving us a general idea of when you are asleep, what's your stress like anyway? What's your recovery like anyway, when we're not able to perceive, you know, we're not awake, we're not conscious, being able to think, oh, I'm so busy, or, oh, I'm so sore. But we are getting that nervous system data. And that's, for me, obviously, as a neuroscientist, the fun stuff, because then I can look at how do we optimize your sleep now in order to get a bigger score, or what factors go into getting you a bigger score. And HRV is one of those things where I don't really have a lot of people who say, oh, my HRV was 85 last night, but I feel like shit, you know, like, but when their HRV is 32, then they're like, I feel like shit today. I don't feel recovered at all. So that's one of those things that really does line up well with our perception of recovery and wellness. So I do like using HRV just as a general, here's how we know how you're doing. It's not a training metric. It's a recovery metric telling us how the nervous system's doing very, very generally. It looks like you did pretty well last night, or it looks like you weren't. What factors can we optimize for tomorrow?
Yeah, brilliant. And you did mention optimize sleep. How do you go about optimizing sleep with your athletes?
So one big thing is trying to buy them 30 to 60 more minutes of sleep a lot of times, because that can make a huge difference just for the mental clarity. If they're cognitively just not there, able to get a grip, or that soreness that just cannot go away, being able to buy them an extra hour of sleep. Or for my athletes who are menstruating or getting ready to menstruate, especially as well, we see the HRV change in flux as well with that, depending on symptomology. So it might just be something where hey, can you please figure out how to allow yourself to get in bed a full 60 minutes early, or tack on 60 minutes on Saturday where I know you have another hour to sleep, so that we are getting, catching up to some extent on recovery. It's really hard to catch up on sleep. We don't actually believe that you can do that sufficiently, maybe to about 30%, but more. It's difficult to catch up or make up for sleep that you've lost. So here and there, trying to push an extra hour of buffer on top of that is important. The other is when we're traveling, still making sure that things are dark, that you're able to get into that nocturnal mode of shutting down, not too much screen, not too much light, and sometimes introducing white noise in the night can be super duper helpful as well if there's lots of stuff going on. If somebody has a restless brain, then that's right up my alley as the psychologist, where we might need to talk about some things or implement some like more specific stress management stuff. Like, what are your specific coping mechanisms? Do you just kind of let it rattle off in your brain and then get lost in this toilet cycle of going down the drain kind of, or how can we get in front of that? Because sleep is really interesting. It's physical and mental, of course. There's a lot of cognitive factors that play into that, and then the environment as well. So it might be environmental, it might be physical, it might be mental and emotional, but the impact that it has, even just an extra 60 minutes of sleep, massive. And sometimes that can really save us before tough weekends, tough matches, tough weeks. So it sometimes just goes on to quantity over the quality sometimes.
Yeah. And are you ever able to adjust what you're doing throughout your training? Because you said, you try and tack on that 60 minutes, whether it's in the evening or whether it's in the morning of a Saturday or wherever you can find it. But if you can't find the sleep somewhere, because let's just say it's the next day is game day, how do you work with that? What protocols do you take to really set them up for game or race or whatever it is?
So if the next day is game day, then obviously we really have a problem. But if, for example, it's maybe we got there on a Thursday, they had trouble sleeping overnight, and then Friday we would theoretically have our last training session, and then Saturday we would play. So if we're looking at sleep over those 2 days, we obviously still want to be able to push them, but knowing that they've had bad sleep Thursday night and then Friday night as well, I'm probably going to pull them out and lower their volume, maybe not intensity, but definitely crank back the volume on Friday, which it shouldn't be a ton of volume anyway than the night before a match or the day before a match, but make that really just a priming session where the nervous system is getting going. If I can, maybe getting them cognitively involved and then completely removing them cognitively from football or swimming or whatever their sport is. Like, please go take some time off. Here's your 2 to 3 hour block where I don't want to hear from you. Don't think about me. Don't think about football or whatever the sport is again. And then be able to turn off and mentally prepare however they best can, having done less volume, but still keeping up the intensity. Because for me, intensity, always approaching everything with intensity is really, really important. Like that sense of urgency. At the same time, like I said, it's still really hard to do anything if you don't have adequate sleep. So then we're really going to look at, okay, afterwards, how can I get you completely knocked out and horizontal going into Sunday? Because I need you to recover. And then we're looking at how we can reduce injury risks after that as well. If we need a recovery session the day after the match, as opposed to a strength training session, that's also okay. But my job primarily, because I'm not a head coach in any sport, is just the damage control and making sure that the recovery stays up so the athletes are even able to perform, because the load that they go through in professional sports is unreal. And the scheduling, timing, traveling, and stress is unreal. And so half the time I just feel like my job is damage control. Okay, you're super tired. Here's what we're going to do about that. All right, you're super sore and have that ongoing soreness, and it's looking like it's turning into maybe a muscle issue that's going to stick around. What do we do about that? Is just jumping into control damage and get the best out of the circumstances that we have.
Yeah.
Sports, not optimal at all.
Yeah. Well, that's it. You mentioned before, that person who has so much going on in their head, and obviously that will affect sleep. I can relate because I'm all up in my head a lot of the time.
Oh my
How
God,
do
who
you
among us cannot? Who among
Yes,
us?
this is true. This is the society these days. How do you manage that with your athletes? What do you do?
Okay, so one trick that really helped for me is from Marsha Linehan, who is the one of the founder of dialectical behavioral therapy, so DBT, and it's actually a therapy form used a lot for people who struggle with or have borderline personality disorder, also bipolar, etc. But they're literally just tools to use in your brain. For example, when you start spinning in the cycle, ask yourself before you get lost, always try to come back to the first thought. Like, what was the first thought that started the cycle? And how did I get all the way down there? It doesn't matter how I got there at the end of the day, but come back to the first thought, because remember, that was the one that mattered. Like, you had that one for a reason, and then the rest kind of followed along. But what was the first one? Okay, that's probably the one that's causing the most stress, because obviously it sent you down this road. Just deal with that one. It's just the one. The other thing is for people who tend to have too many thoughts at once and just get completely overwhelmed, as opposed to going down one train of thought and catastrophizing, is remembering that our thoughts are literally just like popcorn. Our brain just be throwing shit out like, hello, pop, 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 pop. And then when we grab one and hold it tight, now we've made it a permanent thought, whereas it was just going to fall back down and disappear under the other popcorns. It's just going to blend in. It wasn't that important. There was nothing that actually set it apart. So a lot of times, especially if we're already stressed out and primed to think, I don't want to be embarrassed tomorrow or something like that, and then we have a thought about embarrassment, now we're going to hold that one really tight. As soon as you catch that thought, hold it really tight, and now we've made it permanent, but it wasn't permanent before. So being a little bit more open-handed with thoughts and practicing the mindfulness of, I'm just going to let them pop, 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 and observe from over here and not judge them or hold them tightly, is really important. Can be really, really helpful in competition as well, because it's the same thing. I made that mistake, but I'm not going to hold it tight. I'm just going to let it go. Or, the athlete was able to turn, the other team was able to turn, they scored. I'm not going to hold it tight. I'm just going to let it go. So being able to learn how to play with basically an open hand and an open palm is really helpful. And that starts in, as soon as you get those thoughts jumping into your head, just thinking, I'm not going to hold it tight. It's just popcorn. I'm going to let it go, fall, disappear. And then it moves on, because emotions and thoughts aren't permanent either. They last for a couple seconds, maximally a couple minutes, and then they're gone. It's us that cement them then into our brain and into our lives.
Yeah. And so if you grab hold of one of those thoughts, it's just about recognizing that that's what you've done, and somehow let it go. Like,
yeah, we're going to try and let it go. The thing is once you've grabbed onto it, we've kind of cemented it as well, right? So that's the problem. And so it's more getting ahead of that and learning how to, as soon as those thoughts come up, stepping back from the peanut gallery and being like, it's just a gallery. There's a glass wall in between. None of these things are permanent, and they're also not dangerous. Like, they can't attack you. They cannot. They're in your brain. What are they going to do? It's just the thought. It's actually not dangerous. The same thing as a feeling, an emotion is also not dangerous, even if it feels incredibly threatening. Being able to just let it go and be like, okay, I'm going to take a step back from this and observe it from afar. I'm not in it right now. So being able to create that amount of distance makes it a lot easier to just be able to let the thought go.
yeah, incredible. You did give us a little bit of insight into in your introduction about building a complete athlete. Can you break that down for us into a little bit more detail? What does that mean?
My TED Talk URL is, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, don't worry, there'll be links to that.
I'm sure, but no, there's it's fairly simple. There's 3 phases, and it's a triangle. So the first level is the very bottom. The foundation of the triangle is the athlete. The first one is the human. The second one is the athlete, right smack in the middle, and then up on top is the player. And the sport industry tends to work from like the top only, in the athlete and the player in best case scenario. But in most scenarios, if we're being entirely honest, it's just about the player, because we come in as, I don't know, a soccer player, and you just are a soccer player, and you don't get to be thoroughly developed athletically before becoming a soccer player, or developed as a human before becoming an athlete, before becoming a soccer player. So in creating this complete athlete, methodology, it's important that the human is always considered first and foremost, including when it's coming down to who's injured, who's fit, who can play. This athlete is injured. Let's think about the long-term effects of this as well. And not just, are we going to win on Sunday, but also if this athlete has a concussion from 3 days ago, if they get another concussion on Sunday because we let them play early, we're looking at a serious problem that's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. Making considerations like that. And then also, even the dumb small things like this athlete is super stressed out from school. How do we make allowances for this athlete to also be able to study, but also train and also play, even if it means only playing for 45 minutes, or maybe only training twice instead of 3 times this week? Because if they don't pass this exam, they're not going to graduate. And if they don't graduate, they're not going to be able to study, thinking about the long term as well, and not just the athletes while we have them and what they can do for us now. That's why we talk about the athlete comes first, because that's always, or the human comes first, because that's always in our mind. Then develop them athletically on top of that, so that they can play other sports, they can move well, they're not in pain. When I say, hey, I'm done playing basketball, I want to go play volleyball now, that's cool. You just switched out on top, decapitated basically the peak of the pyramid and said, I'm a volleyball player now instead of a basketball player, and learned a new set of sport specific skills. But my coordination, my strength, my endurance, my flexibility, my speed, all of those things were already developed, because that's under category athlete. Just like my intelligence, my personality characteristics, my life, my hobbies are under category human, which is at the very bottom. And that's the base of all things. And without those things, we don't really have the emotional and cognitive development, plus the physiological, like athletic development, to support a long-term sports career. Because there's nothing under or beyond that player category that, hey, I'm a striker, or hey, I'm a point guard, or hey, I swim freestyle. Beyond that, I don't really have anything. So if we then look at after a career, it could be, a professional athlete who retires at 35 with 10 gold medals from the Olympics, or it could be a player who drops out when they're 17 with an injury before going to college out of, the travel league locally. What are they going to do after that? And what are they taking with them? And was it a good experience too? Or did it damage them significantly? Are we sending them out worse than they were when they started? Or are we leaving them better than we found them? Basically better than when they came into the system. Are they more developed? Are they better? Can they take something good with them and speak well of this time, as opposed to having been severely damaged and needing to spend the rest of their lives building back their physicality, or taking care of injuries, or going to therapy, or whatever? That should never be the case. We should be looking out for their well-being from day one, because they came into us as humans, and they're going to go out as humans as well, regardless of what happens in the meantime.
I really love that, and it's so important. And I think even if you're not elite, or you're not even in a sporting club, I work with a lot of runners, a lot of triathletes, and even now we're still putting so much pressure on ourselves to perform, to get the next PB, to run this, to do that, and completely dismissing everything that's going on to get that training session in, to get that hard speed session in, just to get this PB at the next race. And it's why I really loved your talk, and think this is so important to be reiterating and getting out there.
To me, it came to me, if I'm being totally honest, because I, as a psychologist working in football as well as other sports, was shocked coming out of graduate school how much time I spend with athletes who are under the age of 20 saying, I hate this sport, I want to get out, but I can't because my parents invested this much amount of money, or I need to get this professional contract, or I can't let them down because they paid so much, or this means so much to my dad, or this means everything to my grandma, or I just want to make them proud of me, or it feels like a waste of time, I'll be a failure, or simply, I don't know what to do afterwards. If I weren't doing this, I don't know what else I would do, but this doesn't make me happy anymore. So what do I do? And was like shocked and overwhelmed at how many people apparently even professional athletes where you would think this is Olympic level, this is world championships, like you're the best in the world, what's going on, wanted to get out. So what are we doing wrong? Because clearly it's our fault. Like, why are the best athletes trying to ditch? Why do we have such extremely high dropout rates? Why are people leaving sports, especially so young, and then feeling like they can't when this is still supposed to be fun? Yeah, that's where I got stuck. That's where that came from.
Yeah. So where do you start? How do you support the human first, athlete second?
In that situation, or you mean in general?
Oh, actually, let's go with both. Let's start with that situation, and then we'll take it back.
So in a situation where somebody wants to leave sport, obviously a big point for me is how old is this person and what's the context, the life circumstance that's bringing them to this. Is this, the end of high school and we're looking at, do I really want to play in college? And is it just more of a question like, I feel like the expectation of my parents is that I play D1, but I would be perfectly happy playing D3. Like, I don't need to be that competitive. I don't need to fight every day. Or maybe you'd be happy playing NAIA, like JUCO ball, something like that, or just playing in a club league and going to college like a normal person, Is it like an intersection in the road that we're looking at and just need to adjust expectations? Because changing the expectations and taking that down a notch can crank down the stress majorly also. Also looking at, are the expectations from me or actually from somebody else? Like, are they really from my parents, or is it just from me feeling like I'm going to make them mad when I drop out? It's asking those kinds of questions as well. And then getting also input from outside as soon as they're okay with that. Like, hey, can we actually talk to your parents about this? Hey, can we talk to your partner about this? Hey, let's discuss this with your coach when you're ready and able. A lot of times it's going to come down to having a conversation and breaking it down, because we've built this up in our heads to be so much, mean so much, have so much power, and cost so much money, because that's what sport is. It seems very, very powerful. At the end of the day, it's still entertainment and it's still supposed to be fun.
And so then I guess, where do you start, in the sense that we've just spoken about the athlete who's been in it, who doesn't want to be in it anymore? What about that athletes, and this could be starting, really young, they're kids coming through. How do you support the little human first, or however young or wherever stage they're at? Where does that start?
As soon as they hit the pitch or whatever facility they're using to play their sport, as soon as they're there is when we need to start looking at it. Because when I do psychoeducation, like traveling with federations and teaching about psychology and motor learning and kid and athlete development, etc., like, kids need to have fun. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. So yeah, as much as we want to say this is competitive, and we're, a performance team, etc., you can't be a performance team with a U7 team. They're 6 years old. How performance oriented can they really be? Performance orientation can really start happening between like 13, 14, 15, as much as we like to think that it can start early. And again, I know at some point we'll talk about early sport specialization, but that is not it for me. We used to think that the earlier you start your sport and just doing that, focusing on that, the higher your chances of becoming a pro in that sport are, or at least becoming elite in that sport. And that's simply not the case, because we realize that athletes, especially youth athletes, miss out on a ton of other movement, a ton of other experiences and development. To be honest, they miss out on a ton of coordination and physiological development, not doing other sports, only sticking to one, because you only learn the skills of that sport. That's why the athlete is so important underneath the player, because if you were only a soccer player, you will only learn how to move like a soccer player. And I'm in Germany, where they mostly only play soccer. And let me tell you, when you're 30, it looks bad. Like, it's not good, because that's your sport. That's your A and your O, your alpha and omega. And you move like one, you look like one, your body's adapted to being one. Whereas if you also ran track or played basketball, or not as an adult, but as a kid where you played soccer for half the year and then you played basketball or swam for the other, you learn a completely different way of perceiving the world. So your proprioception, where is my arm in the air, is completely different. Or, hey, cause and effect, when I move my arm like this happens. Or, hey, when I train like this happens. So that cause and effect we only get in one line, like the swimming line or the soccer line, depending on what your sport is. And that's not cool, because the later that we develop coordination, like as soon as we hit 13, if we start trying to develop coordination at 13, we're going to have a problem. Like coordination when we're teenagers is really bad. It's really difficult to improve at all, because we become super clumsy due to this. All our limbs are getting bigger and our bodies are changing and hormones are going crazy, and coordination is not optimal to be trained then. And we know that if you haven't trained coordination at all until after you're a teenager, you basically have no hope. It's really, really hard to train coordination and get coordinated after, like as an adult. It's optimal between, when you're a kid up to age 13. And so for me, a lot of this working with young athletes who have just come into this system and focusing on the human and the athlete is, yes, that human development, personality, intelligence, self-awareness and self-regulation, but also then in this athletic side, like go do something else. Let's cross train, come to the gym with me. Let's go shoot some hoops. Let's go for a run around the track. I want you to do other stuff. So you're not just moving in the same sagittal plane or with the same motions that you're going to have when you're a soccer player, because now we've basically expanded the foundation, like the ground floor of your athletic house, to involve a lot of other movements. And so if you're competent in all these movements, it also improves, at least from what the neuroscience research and eye tracking, visual neuroscience research is telling us, like how you scan on the pitch, for example, can be adjusted when you play other sports. So, how quickly your eyes move, your scanning behaviors, eye tracking changes, emotional regulation changes, your game analysis, like your eye for the game, your Spielintelligenz, like your basically your game intelligence is what I'm trying to say, but in multiple different languages, sorry. But like your technical and tactical is also improved from playing other sports. You can be more creative from trying out other sports. You've learned all these different ways of being that apply to other sports that you can now bring into yours. So that automatically massively expands your base of where you're starting from. And so athletically, you can't get a much more advantageous position from being an expert in a lot of different movements, which also then when we're talking about injury risk later is massively reduced. And you also have a better feel of your body. You're able to be more creative. You're able to even execute movements that you want to execute, and not just, I think I'm doing this. You're not.
Yeah.
You're not. So that's how we look after the human and then also develop the athlete, is by giving them the movement options. And then I view movement specifically as the body solving its problem. And that's like a cognitive and physical thing. And so when I give, my U15 players who are 13, 14, a task to do, I just sit back and try not to correct them and let them solve it with their brains or their bodies. Like, you figure it out. I usually won't correct them until the 3rd to 5th rep, or make any kind of changes, anything, just because I want to see how they figure it out, who can figure it out, who needs a little bit of help and where. And that's always a very interesting experiment, just viewing movement and viewing sports as the brain and body trying to solve problems and see how efficiently it can get itself there.
Oh gosh, I love that so much. And it kind of blows my mind when I think about parents who are taking their young children at 4 a.m. to their swimming lessons 5 days a week, and that's it.
It's crazy.
And it's so crazy, especially everything that you just mentioned. The science is there that says doing more stuff, training in more ways is going to be so much more beneficial physically, mentally, cognitively. Perception is going to increase. Like, it's incredible that it's not more well known, or maybe it is. I mean, I don't have kids, so I've got no idea. I just hear from, people that this is what's happening, and have had clients who have come in and, be so tired because they're taking their children to these crazy early training sessions.
For what? What's the promise? Is it going to
Exactly.
be Serena in 20 years or what? Because nobody promised you that. And there's definitely no research to prove that being in the water 6 times a week is going to turn you into Katie Ledecky. Like, that's not. There's so many other latent variables that you cannot consider, like their genetics, their environment, their parents, how much money they have, who their coach was, you know. And we look at these athletes and think, oh my God, Ronaldo did that workout, so I got to do that workout. There are 8 million reasons why Ronaldo did that workout for him, not all of which are probably good. Like, I disagree with half of them, but there's reasons why he did that and can do that, and reasons why you can't and shouldn't, you know.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
we tend to be
Context,
reductionist in
everything.
nature. Exactly. Boom.
When you're working with teams, how do you get the best out of your players? Because everyone's coming from a different background, experience, skills are, vary, personalities vary in terms of how, you said before, how they perceive what you've said of the task and how they perform it. So how do you get the best out of athletes when you're working in a team environment?
Great question. Always dependent on the team athlete, because content is everything. When I'm new to a team or when I have new players in the team, I try to support like the very classic. I don't know if you know anything about Tuckman's like group or team development stages, where, new athletes come in, you got to everybody's got to reorient. The team changes basically because the personalities change. There's been additions, there's been detractions, some have left, some have come. So you got to kind of adjust. Then there's going to be a conflict phase where, everybody's testing everything out and trying to figure out, are you the authority, or, how much can I get around? But I want to come out of that phase at some point, right? So I let them have that moment where they're testing me. And then I try and keep it pushing, where now it's more, we identify as a team, we have some kind of common goal here, being whether, it's doing sprints. I try to attach it to for my football players, I try to attach it to, you have X amount of sprints during a game and your top speed is this. And so if you have more efficient mechanics when you're sprinting, you're going to be able to cover more distance faster and recover faster as well, without expending so much energy and being so damn tired. So we need to do this in order to make you more efficient. Now I got a little bit of buy-in. And so that's that. And then beyond that, they're able to then motivate themselves in a best case scenario. There's always going to be somebody that you need to push a little bit, who gets on my damn nerves, and knows how to poke me in my funny bone more often than I like to admit. But I also tend to be reductionist with my athletes as well, because I like to give them the task, even regardless of what phase of group formation we're in. Again, give them the task and see it as that problem solving again, and let them figure it out. Like, not correct all of the movements right out of the gate, not get on them about their sprint form right out of the gate, because that tends to distract from like the things that we want to get out of it, and detract from motivation. And also at some point they stop listening to me as well. So I just kind of let them do their thing to a certain point. Obviously, when technically we're not clean, or something isn't right, then obviously I correct it, but I try and be hands off with them for the most part, when possible, because the body corrects itself for the most part a lot of the time. There's no reason why I need to be in there like with my hands on everybody's back, squeeze your shoulder blades together, or something like that. Here and there I jump in and give them something, only when it's really important. Otherwise I try and give responsibility to like the team captains, or to somebody who might need a role or something to do, who presents as, I need a little bit of help getting socialized with the team, something like that. Okay, now here's your role. I want you to guide these 4 people through this workout with me, stuff like that. So if I need to get somebody connected, I will do that. But for the most part, it's light education. This is why this matters. Trying to get the buy-in there, letting them do their little authority tussle with me, instead of jumping in immediately and being hard-handed, like, no, absolutely not. Get out of my gym if you try and argue with me, something like that. And just letting them figure it out, being reductionist. For the most part, that works out really, really well. There's always going to be somebody who needs more guidance and pushes harder than I like to admit, but you can deal with that bridge when you come to it. Or at least I can, because it happens less often than I expected, with being a little bit more open-handed and reductionist.
Brilliant. I want to chat more about athlete mental health.
Mhm.
Really important. And during your talk, you gave the example of Simone Biles and how it was really important for her to take a stand, basically.
Mhm.
And obviously, whilst she's probably the first to come out and say I'm not doing well, she's probably not the first to have felt that way. So how do you bring up this conversation about mental health with your athletes, and how do you manage that?
I find it really hard to talk about athlete mental health if we've never talked about anything besides sports together. And so I try and start the basis for that by talking to my athletes specifically about things other than sports, like how are you doing? How's school? How's your girlfriend? How's your family doing? What'd you do this weekend besides when you weren't here, And trying to assess like what kind of resources do they have behind the scenes, or is it for them really all about sport? And then I have an idea of generally who's going to have a problem and who's not. Obviously I cannot read minds. Shit happens. Catastrophes happen as well, where somebody loses somebody and falls into a depression, and now we got an issue. Important to note, I'm a neuropsychologist / sports psychologist. So I'm not a clinician. I don't do therapy. I can't diagnose anything like that. So I always have to send them on a referral to a psychiatrist, psychologist, doctor who I have in my network, and try and get them there as fast as possible if I feel like this is a clinical issue that I just can't work with by myself. At the same time, I have confidentiality. So like anything that is told to me, unless you're going to hurt yourself or others, I have no way to report that and would never do it anyway. Your secret is safe with me when you come talk to me. But I lay the foundation for any intense discussions by always trying to figure out who they are as a person, assess the resources they have, which ones are positive, which ones are negative. If you have great parents who you love spending time with, that's a great resource because that's social support. If you have a huge friend group, great resource, social support. If your friend group all does drugs, probably a negative resource. Might be a little bit good because of social support, but then we also might have substance issues, or we have partying, or recoveries being sacrificed, etc. Just broke up with a girlfriend. Okay, now I know that's I get kept up to date with these things just because I ask and care. And a lot of coaches, depending on what level we're talking about, obviously, but up to the semi-pro and professional level, and even in college, the coaches don't care. They're not going to ask you how you did on your exams. Like they're not going to ask how tired you are. And so as the sports scientist, as the psychologist, I can spring in and ask the questions, figure out who this person is as a human, and try and build up positive resources. And then also view like, hey, is sport even a positive resource for you? Are you coming in here energized and leaving energized? Or is this sucking the life out of you and you actually need a break? Because a lot of times when we see mental health issues, the first thing I'm going to think about is anxiety from expectations, anxiety from internal pressures that we haven't been able to like build down or work through yet. Overuse / burnout. Like, when do you need a break? Are you taking a break? How do we get your recovery baseline back up? And then injuries. That's obviously one that we can't always account for in advance. But as a sports scientist, I'm also always internally assessing injury risk, and the psychological side plays a huge role in that as well. So as soon as I notice those positive resources are becoming less and the negative resources are becoming more, or our coping mechanisms are not positive anymore, they're actually maladaptive now, and we're starting to eat less or eat more or sleep the entire day or not sleep at all, something like that, based on something that's going on. That's when I start to get a little bit nervous and actually confront an athlete in a conversation like, hey, I noticed that in training you're looking a little bit tired or something like that. And I always give them the opportunity in a neutral area to step back from that conversation and be like, I'm not talking about this with you. Or to, on the other hand, say, hey, thanks for asking. Doing terrible. Can we talk about it? And then I just always offer resources like, hey, if you'd like to talk to somebody else, I can come with you. I can help you set it up. I can refer you to someone. I can write you a doctor's note, something like that, so that they know that they're not alone. And also always reminding them, hey, I can't tell anybody about this, so please don't worry. Your secret's safe with me, basically, because confidentiality is there. And that's not something that, especially when we're working in a club system or a university system, they're institutions, right? So they see me with a logo on my chest and think, oh, you're going to tell my coach and now I'm not going to play anymore. Or you're going to tell the sport director and I'm out. I can't, I'm not, I'm totally neutral and I'm literally just here for you. That's my gift. And I don't think I could work in any other position that wasn't directly working for and advocating for the athlete, because it's such a unique, cool position where it's like, your health is everything and your health is my job. Tell me about your health, whether it's mental or physical health. And I take it just as seriously, just like I'm going to send you to the doctor if you roll your ankle to go get an MRI done. I'm going to send you to the psychiatrist just to see if we can do something to help you out mentally, to get some stress down. So that's how I see it, that the mental is literally just as literally taken as the physical, but we have to make room for that beforehand, because you can't expect that an athlete who's in a mental health crisis is going to come to you out of nowhere when you have never shown interest in who that person is as a person. That's not going to ever be a safe environment. And to be honest, I wouldn't also advise athletes who in that scenario to be like, hey, I know you know nothing about me and maybe don't even give a shit, but I'm doing terrible. Like, that's also not safe. So that's how I go about it.
Yeah, so you're literally laying the foundation that first moment that you're with them. And it would be such a relief as well, I would think, because I mean, that's how I would feel, knowing that there is someone there that I can talk to. If I don't feel like I can talk to teammates or coach or parents even, that there is someone there to talk to.
I don't know how you feel about this, Jackie, but I don't know what they say in Australia, but when I grew up in the States, they used to tell us, like, or every now and again you would hear, like, or talk about it with an adult you trust, like your parents or guardians or an adult you trust if there was something wrong. And I grew up not having a great relationship with my parents, where I could not talk to them about that. There wasn't a guardian there for me. Teachers also were not really a thing. And in sport, I just wanted to impress my coach, right? And I wanted to impress my music teachers. And those were all people in authority over me who I could never felt like I could talk to them about something where I was having a serious problem, let alone it being a mental health problem. And so my thing is, when I came into sport, is like, how do we give them another responsible adult that they can trust, who's not directly their coach, who's not their teacher, where there's no performance indicator on top of this, where you can't basically perform better and get me to like you more, or perform worse and get me to like you less. Like, I just like you because I like you, or I'm there for you because you are there and I'm here, like there's no conditions around it. And so giving them another adult to talk to, especially in youth sports, is just massive and really important, in my responsibility, is what I feel.
Yeah, it's hugely important. And to be honest, I don't actually know what it's like at the moment in terms of my own opinion and perspective growing up. Like, Aussie culture, I feel like it was like, suck it up and get on with it. You'll be right. She'll be right. That's kind of how I remember it to be growing up. I'm lucky in the sense that I have a great relationship with my parents. So I would always feel like I could talk to my mum. But you're right. It's such a huge deal and really important for people to have, or for athletes, people in general, to have access to someone that they can talk to and have that confidence in them to do that.
Especially because when you're an athlete and you only talk to people who know you as an athlete, and then your grandparents know you as the athlete, and your friends all know you as the athlete, and your friends' parents all know you as an athlete, like, who are you going to talk to not being an athlete? I'm just the person you can come to and talk to like a human. And I think everybody deserves to have that. So that's where I put myself in for the players, even if it's on the table where I've taped my 100th ankle that day. I just want to talk to you. Like, how's school? What are you studying? Have you learned anything interesting? What's the dumb stuff you did this week? Like, all right, what are you playing right now? Call of Duty? modern warfare. I don't know, I don't care about those things either, but I care about them. And so if they care about that, then suddenly I care about that too. And not in like a dumb way of I want to be friends with you, but more like, okay, if that's something you're interested in and it's going to make you talk, cool, I'm into it. I'll listen.
Yeah. And how powerful is being heard?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
You said the athlete who, did you say retires? Anyway, what do you say to the athlete who is either retiring or forced to retire and they do identify as an athlete? And, I'm sure there's a lot of instances where those athletes have felt lost and unsure of what to do next, who they are, who people perceive them to be. So how do you have that conversation? How do you build the human, the person, so that when they do leave, they're all good?
Yeah, best case scenario is you're going to be doing that in advance, right? And the best case is helping them detach from just an athlete identity by also building another one up on the side. A couple of things to consider is, what did you used to do before you played sports? What were the other things before you became super competitive in the sport that you like to do? What are you good at? What have you always wanted to try that you've never gotten to because you didn't have time? What do your friends do? And sometimes for athletes, it's always interesting when they do actually retire. Sometimes, for the ones who say, oh, well, I used to be really good at art, so I'm going to try painting. Sometimes they actually get through with sport and then realize that's not competitive enough for them. I just want to or physical enough, maybe even, or enough adrenaline involved. And so I always recommend something for calming, something that's more still and meditative, if that's for you. And then try something also that's physical or competitive or exhausting. So that could be biking by yourself, getting a racing bike and going for that once a week. Or it could be joining the fucking bowling league. What do I know? If you really need something competitive, it can be the darts there's so many options. Go try them out. I promise you'll find something that strikes your fancy. There's always going to be something competitive, something that gives you adrenaline, something exciting. If it was for a lot of my pros, they struggle also with not traveling as much once they've retired. Okay, cool, figure out a way to travel. Here in Europe we have the train system, so go hop in one. Or start planning weekends in advance where you're going to go see other things. Or a lot of them also miss the team. Okay, great. Well, this cooking class up the street, it's a group of 20 people who always cook together, and there you also have a team. Or if it's just about the adrenaline and going to exhaustion and you miss being sore, go to the gym and do CrossFit. There's so many options. You just got to try them out. And in best case scenario, you're trying it out far in advance before you even get to the point where you're having to pump them retirement breaks, so that you actually have an exit strategy, the social support, the competition, the fitness as well. Because once they've gotten out of sports, sometimes we lose that drive or that structure for fitness as well. And that's not what we want, because that tends to make things worse. Nobody's saying you got to train at the same level. Please don't train 8 times a week once you're retired as well. But to at least move your body and have some level of structure and health around that is also really important. And sometimes having a coach going into retirement can also be helpful. So hire yourself a strength coach so that you still have that structure. If somebody's telling me what to do, I know what I have to do when I go to the gym. I'm not having to figure it out for myself. There's so many options to make retirement easier meanwhile, but it will never be easy. So in a best case, start in advance before, something with an injury comes up. And if you have to retire surprisingly fast, because that does happen as well, there's still ways to find groups to be in. There's still ways to be mentally stimulated or mentally competitive or mentally fit. And there's still other ways to do fitness as well, like training around injuries. So you're never losing it completely. You'll never lose the sport completely unless you choose to give it up. But that I'm a soccer player or I'm a swimmer or I'm a diver part is going to change, and you have to be used to it. Hopefully those other 2 levels have been built up in the meantime. If not, get to it. You got lots of work to do.
Absolutely. And you mentioned I love it. You mentioned, getting a coach when you retire so that you have that support, but also accountability. Who would you, or how many, what's the support system look like? Like, would you recommend, not just athletes, but people in general, if you were to have a support network of people or professionals that will help us perform at our best, no matter what that looks like for you, who would you say, to build up your corner with?
That's a good question. Obviously, it's going to depend on what you need exactly. But I'm somebody who I need sounding boards and I need experts in every area to bounce things off of. So I know that I'm competent, I have experience, and I have knowledge, but I don't know everything. And so it's really helpful for me to have a psychologist. It's helpful so I have a therapist. I have other sports psychologists who I can bounce ideas off of. So I have the professional level. I've got other sports scientists. I also have a coach who I can hire whenever I need to have somebody else take over my physical stuff. I have mentors as well who I work with specifically for business or for work or for other reasons, where the point is asking questions, working for and with them, gaining experience, but also at the same time, for me, what's really valuable in this circle is to throw something at my psychologist and be like, is this crazy? Like, I'm also a psychologist, but what do you think about this? Am I thinking this too far? And just having somebody else giving feedback, because otherwise, without that sounding board, you're sitting in your own echo chamber and you're stuck there all by yourself. And that's really, really, really isolating. So for me, it's finding the gaps where I know I'm not competent and filling those in. Like, if you're an athlete and every day for the last 20 years, my coach has told me what to do and I never paid attention. So I don't know what the fuck I'm doing now that I'm out on my own. You probably need a coach. But on the other hand, if you're great about that and have been looking forward to writing your own programs, maybe you just need somebody on the side to be like, hey, you're kind of pushing it. So you might want to do some recovery here, or, hey, you're actually under training. You're doing way less than you need to. So if you go out and play soccer right now, you're going to get busted. And that's going to be not pretty at all. To have somebody like checking the balances. So the checks and balances system is really, really important. But like I said, if you're somebody who's really competent in the physical side, it might be time to explore the psychological side, because that's probably where you get some gaps. So it's not just about like, I'm incompetent, so I need a coach. It's more like we're doing a checks and balance system and then filling in the gaps where you still need help. And at the end of the day, giving you the skills in your hands to be able to do it yourself. Yes. But then also the accountability of, you can always come back and ask. Nobody's supposed to do this whole thing by themselves. There's a reason why there's a lot of people in a performance team. That's the same reason. It's because nobody can do it by themselves. Like,
exactly.
Spoiler alert.
That's
Spoiler
it.
alert. Yeah. And that's why you should have more people in your personal performance team too, because you can't do it by yourself.
Yeah, that's
we
right.
Can't look at us objectively. Like, we cannot do it.
Took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
That outside perspective is huge, because like you said, when you're in your own head, that like you literally, that's all you're seeing, you're doing, just going round in circles. And that outside perspective is massive.
Remember at the beginning when you asked, what do we do once we're marinating on that thought and we've lost ourselves and we're down that trail? You come back to the first thought and then you hire somebody to take care of the other thoughts. Because let me tell you something about being stuck in your own brain. If the whole time you're asking yourself, am I doing this right? Am I doing enough? You are going to be stuck on marinating on yourself the whole time and having anxiety about it eventually, because you're the only one thinking about it and you're thinking about it too much. Let somebody else who doesn't have the bias of being inside your body and knowing everything have some input over that. It's really, really, really valuable. And it, being able to externalize it also is really helpful for us, because it's like, check mark, it's outside of my control now. I don't have to worry about it.
Absolutely. And that lends to a bit of self-awareness as well. Knowing that what you're doing is unhealthy and that you should be looking externally for that support.
Yeah.
So since we're there, let's talk about self-awareness.
Since you put us there, here we go.
Exactly. Did I do that on purpose?
Next question is going to be about self-regulation, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do it.
I'm ready.
Where do you start with self-awareness? How do you firstly encourage that conversation with athletes that it's important to understand your emotional triggers or physical limits, whatever it is? How do you start that conversation that this is really important to know you with your athletes?
Well, I'm so annoying anyway, so I'm always asking questions. And just by the nature of asking my athletes questions all the time, and the coaches as well, I don't really discriminate who I'm asking questions of. Um, it requires a level of introspection to answer the question. And so we're able to garner it through that as well. And I also encourage like our head coach all the time, please ask the athletes questions. Like in training, ask them why they did that without a judgment. Like there's not necessarily a wrong answer here. I just want to know what you were thinking about. One area where we got to be careful about that is with people who are going to overthink anyway. And then like, even if you're an absolute expert at your sport, now you're suddenly overthinking, oh, why did I do that? Should I do that? And then next time you're going to think about it too much and then screw it up. So we don't want to do that all of the time. We definitely need balance and to pick and choose training sessions or even like specific moments where we require that self-feedback or self-awareness. One thing I really like to do as well is adding in a self-feedback round to the end of training. So like at the beginning, if we say everybody needs to think of 1 to 2 things that they're and write them down in the best case scenario, like what your goal is for this training session and what you want to improve. And then at the end, your self-feedback round is, did I work on that at all? Did I improve it at all? Did I learn anything about it? And then getting specific about what you did, what you can improve, what still needs to be improved, and how that can be done. So you have like an action point going out of there, and action points tend to make things more relatable over the long term, and then actually something that you can do something with later. But how do we talk to ourselves? So how often am I talking to myself overall? How much of that is positive? How much of that is negative? And so being able to like that, if that's our first introduction to introspection, just generally, how am I talking to myself? What do I say? How often does something like that come up? And then we can get into changing it as well. So, okay, so now that the awareness is there and we've identified what we're saying, where maybe are some of the inconsistencies or the straight up myths and fables and fairy tales that we tell ourselves in our head? How can we correct that to maybe be a little more positive? How can we affirm ourselves? And then we start looking at like, what would an affirmation be? What is true of you? What is positive for you to say to yourself? And that obviously comes into emotional regulation as well, because now you're able to regulate yourself once something has happened or you've said something to yourself, now be able to bam, without judgment, adjust. And what's better than a very flexible, adjustable, light on their feet athlete who's able to like mentally as well as physically also be flexible and creative. So it really starts on our end with asking good questions, not too much, not too often, but picking the right time to ask questions, requiring self-feedbacks as well, and attaching that to goals is really, really helpful. As I said, then working with self-talk, just bringing the awareness to that, and the identification and then regulation of it is a good basically self-feedback into self-regulation, or self-awareness into self-regulation skill.
That's so huge because when you first started, you said about having a goal before your session and an intention, and then at the end of it, feedback or self-feedback on it. And I just thought, well, what if the athlete is always really quite negative about their own performance and self-deprecating? Then how do you change that? But obviously you've then gone on to say, well, asking that question about what is your self-talk like? That's huge.
Well, because a lot of times we just sit in our own heads and shit on ourselves, right?
Totally.
Like, I don't know how it is with you with running and training as well, but like, if you feel like you're not fast enough or you haven't met your training goal, or like, what was the point of this long run period if I can't get this and that done, or if I even have to break my run in the middle because I'm in pain, something like that, and I start talking shit to myself for the last couple of miles because why can't you do this and blah, blah, blah. Is that helping you at all? Have you achieved anything? Or did that just make
Exactly.
you angry and want to quit before you actually like that actually achieves nothing, and at the end of the
That's
day it takes
right.
away massively from your efficiency. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And everything that you've still achieved. The
Oh,
fact that you've
totally.
gone out there, it's, yeah, crazy that we do
Because
that.
we always say at the end for self feedback, like, one, what did I do really well? What was great? What were whether just fantastic? And like be really gracious with that. Be really grandiose. Like, my pass quota today was ridiculous. I completed so many passes. That was awesome. Or my toe on the ball, like my chips today were just have gotten so much better. That was fantastic. And then you can get into what was the bad thing that happened, the third one, or like what still needs to be worked on the third one. How can I make sure that never happens again? So again, where's the action point going out of it? But still, like, be good to yourself. You're still a good athlete. You're still improving. You know, you didn't come here just to like work on the things you're terrible at, but to still improve the things that you're already good at, right? And to use those things. It's about getting better. So in order to get better, you also have to recognize the things where you are already good / getting good at, and not just the stuff that you're terrible at. And part of
Exactly.
self-awareness is knowing when to do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what other tools are there out there for self regulation?
Lots. HRV is also, in my opinion, a form of self-regulation, because we can use HRV as basically a feedback tool. Like I said, it's a big it's a metric of how our nervous system is doing. And so when as the number gets greater, we're looking at the time between heartbeats. And so when we can increase that time or lengthen the waves, we're looking at the direct point of communication between our pulmonary system, cardiopulmonary system, our heart, our lungs, through breathing, and our nervous system. And through breathing, we can actually like touch our nervous system through this one nerve that runs, like the vagus nerve that runs down through the center of our body. And that's a parasympathetic, well, sympathetic, parasympathetic, but primarily parasympathetic nerve, meaning when we touch that through our deep breathing, and there's some cells at the bottom of our lungs that snap open when we breathe that actually activate that parasympathetic system, which helps us to calm down, slow down, regenerate. Teaching deep breathing for me is a huge part of self-regulation, because even using 3 to 5 deep breaths and activating that, basically the parasympathetic neurons at the bottom of the lungs, those cells, and then the vagus nerve to increase our time between heartbeats, basically our HRV, we're literally able to get feedback of how we are changing our body. So sometimes I will use that with athletes, like, here's a heart rate strap, put it on. We're going to do some deep breathing practice to help them see you can physiologically and emotionally and cognitively regulate yourself by doing this. There is a difference. Even if you don't necessarily feel it, there is a difference. So athletes who have a really hard time with, I can't calm down, or enough, my anxiety is out of control, or my thoughts are racing, like, hey, let me show you something. Do this a couple of times. Your heart rate just dropped by 10 points by doing 2 of those, like 10 beats per minute. Now let's have a look at your HRV if they have a puller strap. We're able to see the same thing after they breathe at baseline for 2 minutes, for example, that their heart rate then returns to normal. We self-regulate when we recover as well. That's a form of self-regulation, in which we say, okay, now I'm going to go to sleep. Now I'm going to eat. Now I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to shower, those are the external states more that we're looking at when we're doing recovery. And then the self-regulation is just the internalized version of that. Like, how can I prime myself now to go to sleep in advance? Okay, how can I calm down my brain and not grab a hold of those popcorn thoughts before I'm starting a match, so that I'm not so upset? Whether that's through deep breathing, or through speaking out my affirmations, or another great thing that we use for self-regulation is straight out from a Brene Brown analogy from, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably, where we use seats in the stadium. If somebody has really terrible anxiety or really terrible self-criticism, that self-critical voice in their self-talk, we have them pick out 3 to 4 seats in the stadium, one for the critical voices, like, here's 2 seats for your parents, here's one for the media, and here's one for you, for example. And then you can always see those 4 seats up there, put them all the way up in the nosebleeds, way in the back. And then now it's external for me, right? They're just jeering from the nosebleed seats now instead of jeering at me in my mind. And so that can be really helpful as well, because sometimes we just need to get those things out of us and remind us that, hey, that critical voice came from your mom or comes from your coach or comes from, but it's not actually true of you. Just because you hear it doesn't mean it's true of you. Just because now you hear it in your voice doesn't mean it's true of you still. And so you can tell a lot of these tactics are actually from distancing us from the emotions or distancing us from the thoughts when it comes to self-regulation, because I view self-regulation in sport as like the ability to monitor the distance and the impact from whatever that stressor is. So if I know that self-criticism is going to help me score this penalty kick because it's going to give me the right amount of adrenaline, then I bring it closer to me. But if I know that it's going to make me bomb and shoot it up to Mars, which is my problem always, a good 100 meters over the goal, see you later, sayonara, then I'm going to put them up in the nosebleeds and let them sit there and jeer from way up there where I cannot hear them. So self-regulation is self-awareness in a more advanced state, just like the active version of self-awareness. How can I more accurately make this preferential for me in order for me to succeed the way that I perform best?
I love that. And I really love the HRV example and giving something tangible, because we all love data. We all love seeing how we make a difference then and there.
Yeah.
So that one's huge.
Big times. Yeah.
Julia, this has been so awesome. Tell us more about White Line Performance, and if there are people who want to find you, how can they do that?
You can find me at whitelineperformance.com/Instagram/whitelineperformance.com. Like, you can find White Line Performance pretty much everywhere that you can stalk your exes. We're online or email me at julia@whitelineperformance.com. It doesn't matter. We're everywhere. We're a consulting and coaching company. So that means that I myself and my performance team, which is a nutritionist, a couple of physios, a sports med doc, and a couple of psychologists in my extended team, our goal is to put healthy athletes over everything and create like a full functioning ecosystem outside of clubs, because we know that athletes can get those things in a lot of sense. Male athletes in professional sport can get those resources, or in college or whatever, quite easily. But female athletes or athletes in the middle, non-binary athletes, trans athletes, or simply athletes who aren't playing at pro, semi-pro level, who need a little help getting there or are on the way in transition, whatever, they can't get that easily. So having the nutrition advice, having the psychologist, having the sports scientist all at your fingertips is what we essentially offer. So we do training, we consult with national teams and federations. I'm a psychologist for several national teams here in Germany, as well as sports scientists here in clubs. So, we do all the classic sports science and psych stuff, but for us at the end of the day, it is the healthy athletes over everything. And it's making athletes happier, healthier, and then helping them perform from there. And like the proof of when we focus on this, we get this. Again, the cause and effect. When they're healthy and happy, when they are optimized, they can also have an optimal performance, but it doesn't go the other way around long term. And that also, as I had mentioned at the beginning with this pyramid, human athlete and then performer, like the sports specific player, it also goes down on the other side. So we build them up on that side. And then when they're ready to retire, we build them upwards from the human to the athlete to the player. And then when they're ready to retire or change, or they're injured, something like that, then we help them build down from, I'm a soccer player. Okay, now I'm an athlete and I want to switch sports, or I just want to be an athlete, enjoy being fit, or I don't want to move ever again a day in my life. I just want to be a human and do something completely different. We help them get there from there as well, from a psychological standpoint, but also a physiological standpoint, a nutritional standpoint, if that's what they need. That's our goal. That's our life. That's the dream. And then obviously psychoeducation is a huge part of mine as well. Helping coaches and athletes also get these skills in their hands to be an extension of my arms, because there's just not enough psychologists, and we will always need more. So the more help we can get, the better. And yeah, you can find us at White Lion everywhere.
Amazing. You're doing such incredible work, and you provide such an incredible resource, through your company, and also all the, the other stuff you're doing through the Instagram as well, which we've got free access to. I mean, it's incredible. And thank you for the work that you do. You're awesome. To finish this out, I always have one question where I would love to get one action people can do straight away to improve themselves or their performance. So I guess my question to you is, what is your message to athletes who want to absolutely perform at their best, but are struggling with the mental side of things? I mean, we've spoken hugely around this mental aspect. How do we know that we are struggling mentally? What can we do to then get on top of that?
So if you think about your brain as like a certain amount of real estate and just kind of map it out as, I have this amount of square meters, make a list of how you actually fill up those square meters, like what's taking up the most space. Imagine if it's exams and it's taking up, a quarter of the space, girlfriend is taking up a tenth of the space, family is taking up, half of the space, and sports is taking up another 10% of the space. And what do you have left, right? It's going to look different for everybody. And somebody who's really stressed out or struggling with whether it's physical or mental injuries or trauma or simply just a mental health down moment, it happens also. Everything's in flux. We have good days and bad ones and good weeks and bad ones. But map that out and then see what you can reduce. Because the more mental real estate you can get, the less stressed out you are going to be as well. See what you can actually delete, see what you can reduce, spend more time on, spend more mental real estate on, and then try to actually implement that in your real life. Like, don't just reduce it on that piece of paper where you say I have 100 square meters, but also be like, I'm actually just going to train 3 days a week instead of 5, or I'm actually going to take this week off, or I'm going to push this exam to next semester, or I can't change anything. But I can adjust my expectations to know that this is only going to be this way for 2 weeks and not 6 months or 2 years, something like that. And then have an end date for some of those things. So you at least know at the end of the day, my mental real estate will be more and I'll have more space to work with. So, on this specific date, and then date those things as well. If there's things that just cannot be changed, will never be changed, don't have an end date on them, or even if they do, I can never recommend professional help, whether that's the help of a psychologist, sports psychologist, or a psychotherapist, psychologist, psychiatrist. Go talk to somebody. Like, there are 1,000 other skills. I've only given a couple here, but there are 1,000 million trillion skills, and they're always specific to the person that we're working with. And really important to say also, like, 2 heads are better than one. Like, it seems like really dumb, but the more people you have working with you, that's the reason why we function better in teams in sports. And that's why even like individual athletes have multiple trainers, an athletic coach, a doctor, a physio that travel with them. Yes, you might be the one who's performing, but everybody else around you is making sure that you can. So if you are struggling, get the right people in the boat with you, get the right people on the team with you to like kind of help lift you up and make sure that other people are advocating for and with you and looking out for and with you. You don't have to do it by yourself. So yes, the mental real estate thing is really great, but never be afraid to like reach out and ask somebody for professional help, because build your team. You have full capacity and full ability, and also partially the obligation to build your own team. Even if you've been given one, if it's not adequate for you, then find the one that works and take responsibility and let other people advocate for yourself, so we can also advocate for you.
Yes, I love it. I'm so going to do my mental real estate when we get off this call. That was brilliant. Julia, thank you so much. This has been sensational. I appreciate your time.
Most welcome. Thanks so much, Jackie.
That was Julia Eyre of White Line Performance, with so many strategies to really help you build self-awareness, and from that, a deeper understanding of your specific needs to self-regulate when you need to. So beneficial in everyday life, as well as applying it to your work and sport. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a review and share it with your friends, because every little bit counts to bringing this podcast to those who need it. As always, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have the best day, week, month, and year. And here's to a world of bodies built better.